Men go too far greater lengths to avoid what they fear than to obtain what they desire. In another world, in another time, we would have said that fear can be a pretty powerful motivator to villains. But as COVID-19 had unfolded earlier this year, we had slowly realized that we have seen how much fear has been allowed to govern us if we allow it to. And yet it was due to this pandemic that we have shown the real characteristics of us as human beings. Whether it be politicians suddenly blaming leaders for the responsibility of this as not doing it sooner, or we choose to show the greater side of humanity. Either way or form, we all had a choice whether how to handle that fear. And I think The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, despite being released months before this pandemic had arose, I think really teaches the best concept, especially through the Skeksis, how fear is the driving point to leading on to choices and how it leads to the downfall of any nation or any form. And really, the Skeksis, I could take a whole video of analyzing each and every one of them, but I mostly want to focus on Skekso at this point, the Emperor, especially leading on to the scene right before he takes on the Darkening.
Do you sleep? Of course, sire. Do you dream? Dream? Yes. No, Emperor. Neither did I, until I began my experiments upon the Darkening. Now my slumber is riddled with nightmares. Do you remember what it was like before we were rent asunder? I don't think of such things. And yet, the thoughts come.
As I rewatched this series for the third time throughout the series, and after talking with my associates at the Featherbrains, I had realized that fear is pretty much the basic foundation of how the Skeksis really started. If you go back into the research, which I won't bore you all with the atmosphere of how the Urskeks really got split and everything, we realized that being split apart and being afraid of after when they were separated into the Skeksis and Mystics, we get to see that they have this new sense of identity and how they obtain this new identity and how they see themselves. While the Mystics choose to go into isolation to try to keep away from their dark halves as they see, the Skeksis really embrace their new power, despite being shown of the ugliness on the inside of their former selves when they were whole. And yet they were abusing the crystal and eventually for the Emperor, which was the Darkening. It wasn't until when the crystal started not giving the life back to them, despite them trying again and again and again, the Emperor still clinged on to a hope that he would beat the greatest enemy that anyone can really adapt to, and that is mortality.
We know the torment that lies behind us, but what torment waits beyond this existence? All the more reason to hold on to life with all claws. No matter the cost.
Parasites! Thieves! In the end, you are nothing but dust!
I will never be dust!
In many stories and many forms, we have seen that fear of mortality, especially to yourself and to those that you love, can be a driving point to the decisions that you made. I could give several examples in entertainment of how the fear of losing yourself or those that you care and love for can really drive you into wrong decisions. Anakin Skywalker, based upon people's thoughts of the prequel series, really showed how he was driven by fear of losing his loved ones led on to the path of the dark side. In the end, was still redemptive. But then again, despite on everything that has happened, we still get the weird memes that go on. The better example is Judge Claude Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In both the books and in the animated adaptations, we had seen that Frollo, despite whether a judge or a priest or whatever you call it, depending on the adaptations, is driven by the fear of being judged upon, either by the church or the greatest hierarchy, which is God, being the fear of judgment. And that's what I think that also that Skekso really showed within this dialogue too, that he was afraid of the life beyond his own existence. Pretty much the fear of judgment. that everyone pretty much feared at this point. The better understanding of how we're not different from the Skeksis when it comes to fear really comes from a 1992 Nurses Diagnosis article about the concept analyze of fear, which the article really pointed out the theories of human behavior and in nursing are pretty much reviewed based upon the patients. The 5 critical attributes occurring in all cases of the fear are identified are either a model case, a related case, a contrary case, and the legitimate case are presented in each of the patients. Aspects to fear are divided. And I think Dark Crystal Age of Resistance has really showed the division of all the cases of fear, not just on the Skeksis, but on the Gelfling as well. We see the relation of Rian and Celadon wanting to please their parents, yet they were given such high expectations despite the different rankings. Hence, Y is driven forward to expose the truth of what the Skeksis had done, while the other was willingly to compromise her mother's teachings in order to show the hierarchy that she was capable despite the doubts of others. Little Hup is scared for Deet because she is pretty much almost vulnerable out there, and despite his dream of becoming a paladin, he is still afraid of not being taken seriously based upon his class stature. And poor Skektek, the scientist, had given us such abuse that he has the concept of fear of failure, which costed him his eye. And again, a family picture!
No.
Because of the harassment that the Skeksis have been given to him, he is pretty much abusing all of the other creatures. He even pretty much rejected his formal friendship with Algra for other reasons that I probably won't get into detail, but I will post lores in the description below on that one. But I will say this, that he focused on so much experimentations with his work that he was even willingly to remove his own arm and leg, and even so much as put mechanics in his own jugular just so he could see his blood flow. He would have claimed that this was all for experiment and science, but in reality, it was more of self-harm because of all the abuse he went through. He may be a villain, but he was also empathetic. Even to the point when we were even frightened when he killed the one Grunak. And to quote a famous Jim Henson puppet too, which I was still mad that they ended up doing CGI with him on the end. Fear is the path to one's darker side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. You live by on what things could have been, and yet what things should be. But the problem is that we do not live in the now, and taking the first step day by day. And speaking of self-mutilation, it was really unique to see that the Emperor was pretty much driven by so much fear, even to the point when he was experimenting with the darkening, that he himself was pretty much getting deteriorated and pretty much causing his body to pretty much fall apart. And even though I haven't fully watched The Dark Crystal yet, I could see from that particular scene that he was not looking his best in the end.
Exposure to the darkening is not without consequences. It destroys, corrupts my body as it does all of Thra. True power demands sacrifice.
So we knew that he was pretty much deteriorating, and even Jason Isaacs even quoted that the Emperor is pretty much frightened, that he doesn't really focus on what should matter and what should improve his mortality. Unlike the two best Skeksis and pretty much the group's opinion that everyone could agree on, that pretty much don't rely on the crystal, but rely pretty much on their own cell being. And that would be Skek-Gra the Heretic, and of course Husbando, Skek-Mao the Hunter. And I'm going to try really hard not to go too much onto Skek-Mao, for that's another video for another day. But both of them had a mission on hand to where they actually don't rely on essence or on any form. Sure, Skek-Gra was afraid of being separated and never reunited with his mystic to become an Urskeks again, and I believe that Skek-Mao stood out the most not only because of the concept design and his characteristics, but he relied on pretty much the environment all around him. He never wanted to be involved in the court, nor we have seen by far by canon standards that he took part of the crystal. But I think that's what made him so fit, that he was living in the now and he had a focus on the hunt. And yes, you're sorely missed. I will say, if Skekmal had a chance to give Skekso with intelligent quotes from Nobel Peace Prize winner Marie Curie, she would actually gave a really good statement based upon her radiology and on experiments like that. Skekso could have learned from this lady. All jokes aside, she did pull out a really good point about living for today and not allowing fear to govern us. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. And that's the message really that the Dark Crystal was trying to address. And really, I would address this too. We live in a world of uncertain times. Events have been canceled, conferences have been canceled, schools were closed. We lost our form of structure, whether through work or gatherings or even selling points. Businesses seem to be going up and down. We live uncertainly. Food is scarce. But yet, this is our moment to really show our true colors, for we all had no choice but to show our true colors how we accepted through. I was recently given a good compliment of how well I was surprisingly embraced through all this, and the matter is, this is no more than a different challenge. Now, I'm not giving myself a pat on the back, though that is partly true, but I would encourage others to really take on this challenge. It makes you face yourself and think. Because, in all honesty, fear may be a powerful motivator, and it can help us drive, but we must also remember to take that first step forward. So instead of consuming ourselves in our own self-pity and in our fears, and in something that seems to only numb the pain, we should be able to go out there and rediscover ourselves, even in uncertain times. And I'm hoping that people would actually look upon the show and even think of it that way. Because in some respects, we see in ourselves in both good and bad characters in the concept of morality, if you know what I mean. I am the Dark Horse of KC. Have a good, creative, and blessed day.